Welcome to the HDR Digital Assets Group podcast series where we talk with thought leaders in the cryptocurrency space. Today, we have a very interesting guest named Chris Verceles. He is from the Philippines and he's very active in the crypto community in the Philippines. I think he started out participating in local events, the local consensus in the Philippines, and now he's on his way to starting and cultivating his own startup blockchain company in the nonprofit space called LifeMesh. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thanks for having me.
So, Chris, can you tell us more about your background and what brought you to the crypto space? One of the central theses that a lot of industry pioneers talk about is that blockchain technologies will be adopted more in countries without legacy systems. And being a Filipino myself, I think the Philippines is one of the places where you can definitely spearhead certain institutions forward with the use of blockchain. Can you just tell us a bit more about your background?
Sure. Yeah. So I started out with my undergrad in computer science. So that was from DLSU. That's De La Salle University here in the Philippines. And when I graduated, I started working for ITRS. They basically service clients like Citibank, HSBC, Bank of America. They provided desktop monitoring applications for their operations. So I started out as a client-side developer back then, and after a few years, I built a company. I got into imports and distribution for medical equipment, but on the side, I never stopped programming. So when Ethereum came about in about 2015, because it was attractive because it was basically a smart blockchain, meaning it was sort of a programmable blockchain, which is what I understood back then. So in late 2015, I set up a small mine. Ever since then, I've been expanding it with some friends of mine. And yeah, it's going pretty well right now. The market's a bit down, but it's still profitable, which is good. Along the way, Consensus started launching their blockchain for social impact hackathon here in the Philippines and around the world. So luckily, Manila was one of the first cities they launched in as well. And I basically just jumped into that when I saw it because I was tinkering with Solidity. So for those of you who are familiar, Solidity is the programming language of the Ethereum blockchain. So yeah, that's actually how LifeMesh got its start. When we joined the Consensus Hackathon, we actually didn't know each other at all. But as we continued to work together, we came up with LifeMesh.
Nice. Yeah, I think having Solidity is still a pretty rare skill to have today. I think a lot of companies have enough finance people and enough business people, but they really need the engineers. So that's pretty cool. So you mentioned you studied in De La Salle. Obviously, that's a very good computer science school in the Philippines. And just curious to hear your thoughts about the overall regulatory environment back home. Are the regulators cracking down on crypto? What's the outlook that the Philippine SEC has, and maybe other parties that maybe might have some involvement in this space, like the VSP?
Right. So they're still drafting their official stance regarding that, but from what we can tell, they're in constant contact with the local blockchain community and startups. It's looking to be a really friendly stance, actually, and most likely, judging from our interactions, and this is not official advice or this is not an official announcement, but it's looking like if you want to run a token sale in the Philippines, you just need to register as a security and you'll be good. So as long as you acquire that registration, then you shouldn't have a problem.
Oh wow, cool. But I guess the case with the Coolatta coin was they were not allowed to do a traditional security equity offering, right? And they tried to go around the rules by doing an ICO, and it seems like they got screwed over as well, right? Or what is the case there?
Well, that's true though. They were revoked their official license to trade publicly. Aside from the aside from the crypto situation. But then they did try to bypass it. You're correct in that regard. So that's a use case in what that's like an example in what not to do. So there are companies here doing, they're following regulations perfectly. PointsPH is a good example. So as of last year, if I'm not mistaken, late last year, PointsPH was second in the number of users for their exchange, second to Coinbase actually, because they're very similar to Coinbase if you haven't heard of them. So they're actually doing pretty well. And there are other blockchain startups here that are following regulations perfectly as well. They're growing. They recently finished their ICOs. So some of them, such as QuickWire.
You mentioned, what was the name of the company?
The last one I mentioned, the cross-border real estate payments company, is called QuickWire. So they're one of the they're one of the local blockchain companies that just finished their pre-sale of their ICO. So it's actually growing. So it's actually growing. There's a lot of blockchain startups, popping up in the Philippines. Several are in the humanitarian space as well, since it's clearly a well understood problem here in the community.
That's awesome. I think Coins.ph is a very promising project, right? Like if you look at their funding round, they're actually backed by pretty legitimate people. For example, they're backed by Pantera Capital. I think they participated in their Series A, and they also have the backing of the DCG or Digital Currency Group. That's run by Barry Silbert, an Emory alumni, and actually one of the biggest advocates for blockchain today. Like he was in the Forbes top 10, I believe, for blockchain, like the wealthiest blockchain people. And yeah, I think it's pretty cool that there are more social impact blockchain projects in the Philippines. I think one of the key imports of the Philippines is, hospitality and services, right? So I think the Filipinos always have a reputation for being very hospitable, and it's a top destination for people who are interested in service activities and a lot of missionaries as well. So I think that's pretty exciting. So
sorry, it cut out a bit, so jumped in there a bit too soon. But yeah, that's definitely true. But more than that, I think the humanitarian situation, given that the Philippines is situated in the ring of fire, it's something that people are very aware of. Like they know there's a need to fix the inherent problems in funding for disaster situations, emergency response systems. So in my opinion, that's one of the needs that will really catapult the tech industry if it does grow up here in the Philippines. So it's not like in the States you guys started Facebook. You have a lot of these big app businesses. Here in the Philippines and around Southeast Asia, emergency response situations, humanitarian applications are really what's going to be what future companies will build their big products around.
Got it. So the last time I met you, you mentioned that LifeMesh got its start in the Consensus Blockchain for Social Impact Hackathon. Can you tell us more about the idea for LifeMesh and what do you guys do exactly?
Sure. So the Blockchain for Social Impact Hackathon happens in almost every major city, and it's run by Consensus, as you mentioned. So their goal is really just to fund and initiate the development of humanitarian aspects of companies who are developing solutions for the humanitarian aspects. So with LifeMesh, when we started that last September, we joined and we looked at the team that we joined with, and we realized that we have the tech know-how to build what we need. So that was me and the other developers in the team, and most interestingly is that we had an expert in the NGO sphere. So Carlo Delantar, our partner, he actually runs an NGO. It's called Waves for Water. They provide water filters to areas that need it, such as in Marawi. Actually, right now they just finished a trip to Marawi, and several other areas. So when we were looking at it, we were doing our research, we were doing our market research, and we realized that the humanitarian industry hasn't really been impacted by tech in the same way that, let's say, communications has or transportation has with Uber and other ride-sharing companies. So we researched it even more, and we realized that most people would approach the humanitarian situation by setting up a sort of crowdfunding service, right? Sort of Kickstarter style crowdfunding services where they try to raise monetary funds for humanitarian trips where they buy the goods and turn it over. So then we realized that while there were a lot of attempts to automate the crowdfunding process, there weren't a lot of attempts to solve the supply and delivery tracking process that happens after the money is used to buy material goods or in-kind goods. So we decided to tackle that. So that's what we're doing now. So basically, LifeMesh is connecting NGOs that provide help to governments or affected communities that may need that help.
Got it. So that's pretty interesting. I think a lot of times when people think about what blockchain technology is supposed to do, it's to basically challenge existing institutions and provide hopefully a more efficient way of distributing products, tracking, keeping track of accounts and other things like that. So the next question that I have for you is, how can you achieve your goal more effectively than the current industry incumbents? And who are these incumbents that you think would be in the same position, carrying out the same services?
Right. That's actually a really interesting question, because when you talk about industry incumbents in the humanitarian sphere, there are almost none. So for example, if I say online shopping and deliveries, I would think about Amazon and a lot of stuff. If you say search, you'd say Google or social media, Facebook. But if you say the humanitarian industry or the humanitarian sphere or donations, there isn't really much that pops to mind aside from Red Cross or the UN. And that's because there aren't really many tech companies that are trying to solve that or haven't gotten big yet, solving those problems. The closest ones I would say are crowdfunding solutions, but most of them are just startups as well. Maybe 6 months to a year ahead of us. There are several, so there aren't really any major incumbents that are in the space yet, which I think is a sign of a great opportunity, because if there is a company in the humanitarian space, they're focusing on crowdfunding and not the supply and delivery tracking that LifeMesh is building right now and testing right now, actually. So in terms of how can we compete against industry incumbents, I think it wouldn't be that difficult, because no one's doing what we're doing, not that we've seen.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think today, when you look at the natural disasters, you mentioned the Philippines is in the Pacific Ring of Fire, and I think, like for example, in other earthquake-prone countries like Haiti, you have an extreme need for people and companies to be able to distribute resources in an equitable and efficient way. So I think that's very, very cool. Like you guys are definitely trying to do something pretty innovative.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it so that if you want to donate goods to someone, it wouldn't be giving your money or giving your material resources to some organization. Like, for example, no matter how reputable the organization is, it's like you're just blind trusting them to deliver your goods on time and in the way they promise. Trying to make it transparent, or it visible to the whole world, and in a way that the whole world can be tracked the same way on Bitcoin blockchain. Anyone can just see that, hey, I sent this person some Bitcoin, he has it now, and everyone can confirm it. So that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with humanitarian goods in terms of supply and delivery tracking.
Yeah. So what are some of the industry trends and developments that you predict will occur in the short, medium, and long term in the cryptocurrency space? Maybe I think your perspective in Southeast Asia and the Philippines would be more valuable. So yeah, I know these developments can be anything from coding developments, because you're a very good programmer in Solidity, or it could be like big picture as well. Like what are the key trends and developments that you see will happen going forward?
Right. That's a great question for Southeast Asia because generally the technology trends are sort of lagging behind those of the, let's say, the Western world. Definitely in Asia, it's moving a bit slower. Blockchain tech is actually helping speed that up a bit, and I'm actually seeing that locally, like in stores more. I can actually pay with Bitcoin and Ethereum because of Coins.ph. So in the fintech applications, like I mentioned with Coins.ph, now you can easily pay for your food in Bitcoin and Ethereum at a lot of places, a lot of restaurants and bars here. I think that future developments are going to include, for example, ride sharing, because ride sharing now, if you've heard the news, Uber is selling its Southeast Asia business to Grab. There's a startup called Arcade City, and they're actually in Manila now. Manila is one of the first cities they launched in after LA. They're a blockchain-based ride-sharing startup. So definitely ride-sharing, the competition for ride-sharing is not over, and Grab seems to be a monopoly here right now. But there are blockchain alternatives coming out. And yeah, naturally in the humanitarian sphere, there are easily about 5 different startups here working on that application, and LifeMesh is one of.
Cool. The part on ride sharing is very interesting because I read a recent ARK investment report recently, and it's their fundamental thesis is that ultimately cars will be people won't really want to have cars in the future. They don't want to own cars. But rather what you'll see is instead of having you know Uber right now, what you'll get is like autonomous Uber. So something they call autonomous mobility as a service. And the whole point of that is very appealing to me from an economic perspective because the whole sharing economy is based on collapsing your fixed costs into variable costs, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense for millennials such as ourselves. Like I never want to really own a car. I just want to get from point A to point B, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Actually, I've been excited about what Tesla's planning to do. If Elon Musk decides to push through with that, I think if I remember correctly, he wants to create a Tesla fleet of self-driving cars. While you're at work, you can just let your car go out and earn money from you, and that makes a lot of sense. It's like
Yes,
mining actually. It's passive income.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, exactly. And I think that's why current industry incumbents that are not in the luxury car space will probably lose out in the next 10 to 20 years. I think the most Tesla is not just a car company, right? It's a it's a very disruptive company. Like sure, maybe it's not the most profitable company, but it's a car manufacturing company. It's also a company for batteries, right? And electrical batteries, alternative energy, and yeah, it's they have their hands in a lot of pies.
definitely, definitely. Yeah,
Okay, so Chris, that's all the questions that I have for you today. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast, and we're very thankful for your unique insights from the Philippines. I'll be sure to post your social media and your website links in the description below. And yeah, I hope to see you in Manila again sometime.
definitely. And thanks for having me.
All right, perfect.